Hello and welcome to PSC's latest and greatest webinar. I see people rolling in, so welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so happy that you are here. Um, Happy Tuesday if you're a Tuesday person. We are here with our next webinar, The Indivisible Chain, Healing Pet Health from the Soil Up. So I am joined by Cico Rodriguez with Amplified Ingredients. Thank you so much to Amplified Ingredients, one of our wonderful PSC members, for helping to host this webinar and bring it to life. Thank you also to WPA for sponsoring our whole series of webinars this year. We really couldn't do it without your support. So thank you so much. I am here just to give a little welcome in case you are new to the Pet Sustainability Coalition. First off, my name is Allison Hamburger. Welcome. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Innovation. What we do is we are working towards a vision of a sustainable future where every choice for pets supports a thriving planet. So imagine going into your pet store and just everything you see on shelf is not coming at the expense or harm of our beautiful planet. The way that we do that is through our mission, which is really bringing the industry together through collaboration, education, and innovation. So today we are solidly in that education bucket, and we're so happy that you're here. Our coalition is made up of companies all across the pet industry supply chain and all around the world. So if you see yourself on this list of logos, welcome. We're so glad to have all of our 200-ish members. And if you're not on this slide, consider joining us because we're really your partner for sustainability because we're tackling issues that one company can't solve alone. Next up, a few announcements. After this one, our next webinar is about freeze drying with Parker Freeze Dry. So definitely put that on your calendar. The date on that is wrong, but we will send out the correct date in the chat. We are also gearing up for Pet Summit and Global Pet Expo in March. We also have Pet Food Forum coming up in Kansas City, so lots of opportunities to come hang out with us in person. Next, we are on Zoom. So a few just housekeeping things about this platform. Please use the chat feature. You should see the little chat button at the bottom. If you want to say hello, introduce yourselves, the chat is the place to do that. You'll also see a little react button with a heart. We actually can't see you. We know that you're here because we see the number of participants, but we can't see your faces and your reactions. So I see a few coming now. If you want to let us know that you are hearing what we're saying, feel free to send one of those little icons over. And then most importantly is the Q&A feature. At any time throughout the presentation, if you have a question that you would like us to address, drop that in the Q&A, not the chat, because at the end of the presentation, we will have some time for audience questions, and the Q&A is where we're going to be going for that. Okay, so enough with housekeeping. I have a little brain warm up before I turn the floor over to Cico. So we're going to be talking about nutrients today. And I know that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. We all know it's important, but let me just talk about why it's important. So a nutrient is any of the substances in food that support life, growth, and health. And actually that phrase in food is important because there are also options for synthetic nutrients that have some trade-offs that Cico might get into later. Nutrient density is the amount of these beneficial nutrients per calorie per serving. So those terms are going to come up. There's a lot of text below this too. Just know that there are macronutrients. These are the ones that we need in really large amounts like proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Micronutrients, they're needed in small amounts, but they're still really important. These are vitamins and minerals. And then there's this thing called phytonutrients, which are naturally occurring in plants. They're not necessarily essential, but they're still important. The other thing about nutrients is that I'm saying we, because obviously we humans need nutrients, but our pets do too. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And the expert that is going to be guiding us through this is Cico. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I learned that you have been passionate about nutrition since you were a teenager. At first, it was about just getting faster and stronger at basketball, but then it got a little bit more serious when your mom had cancer for the first time. I'm very pleased to share with the audience that she is alive and well today and that nutrition played a key role in her health. So, Siko learned firsthand how foundational nutrients are for health at a cellular level. So he went on to get a degree in biology, and while in college, also got really interested in sustainable farming after learning about the concept of food miles. He started his career at Garden of Life, which is a dietary supplement brand focused on digestive health, and helped launch over 40 finished good products. But I guess while he was there, he discovered that his real passion was for ingredients more so than finished products. So that's where he's focused his career. Now, as the president of Amplified Ingredients, that was launched in just 2025. Congrats on a year. He's responsible for discovering new ingredients and guiding formulators with new innovations that transform the metabolic gut health products of the future. So, welcome, Siko. Thank you so much for being here. Over to
Thank you
you.
so much, Allison. Thank you, Alex, in the background, for all the coordination, and thank you to the PSC team. I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be supporting this massive focus of, taking care of the planet that takes care of us.
Yeah. And you know what? We didn't launch the poll yet. So let's do that now.
Oh,
We have
yeah.
a little interactive moment for the audience. We want to know which product category presents the biggest sustainability challenge for your business right now. So hopefully you should see some options on screen if you want to take a few seconds to just let us know if it's dry food, wet food, treats, supplements, hard goods, packaging. Um, and I guess if there's something else that's not meeting your needs, you could drop that in the chat as well. Okay, I'm seeing people still answering, so we're gonna stall a little bit. It looks like so far packaging is winning. So
Wow.
if you are on a different category, be sure to give us your answer. Let's
It's
take
great
another.
to see people from all over, Allison. I saw somebody from Poland, so internationally, and Connecticut, Colorado. I'm here in Florida, which it's colder in Florida than it is in a lot of places right now, which I'm shocked by, but glad to be here with you all.
Yeah. Okay, so before I pop off and officially turn it over to you, it looks like our results packaging had won, and then kind of split between the food and treat and supplement formats. So have at it. Thank you.
Very cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Um, Often in our highly connected world, um, we often feel disconnected. Whether it's people that we haven't reached out to in a long time and relationships that we haven't been able to foster because we get very, very busy in our world, and sometimes those foundational things get neglected. So we often have to remind ourselves to um, take care of those key relationships because some of those foundational relationships affected so many other areas of our life. And the same is true for the nutrition of our pets. And I believe that there is an invisible chain, but a vital one that helps heal pet bodies, minds, and longevity all the way from the soil up to where we get to see it today. And so if soil is the hidden treasure, we get the fruit of that soil, the yield of that soil for the benefit of our pets. I want to take us back in history a bit, not too far. Some of you might be old enough to remember the dog show Lassie. I watched it as I was a kid. It was in black and white, even though I was, born later than the 70s. The show had this dog that was always outside, always energetic, always around the family, and not dissimilar to today, the dog ate what was available to humans, and it was given real food, whole food, and it was basically thriving through activity and nutrition, and obviously love and care, like we want to give our pets today. Um, but as time went on, we saw a change in the human nutrition side over the decades. And the human nutrition started to feed into changes in pet nutrition. We had some meaningful changes to agricultural practices, We had some significant impacts to what was being fed to the animal from a macronutrient, and then it impacted the micronutrients that the dog got. And sometimes we see surprising things that pets are being given that maybe weren't defined as food in the past. And so I want to distinguish the difference between, how we as humans and animals used to eat to how we're eating today, and the impact of that. And it all really started with this idea of the universal law of health. There's a agriculturalist from England in the 1930s. His name's Sir Albert Howard, and he said, "The health of soil, plant, animals, and man are one and indivisible." What that means is you can't have sick soil and healthy humans. You can't have sick plants and healthy animals. The two are incompatible. It is a undivided chain that we need to put together. And the chain is a little bit more complex, but the actions that we can do are really simple. And we're going to be getting into some of that. But we first have to start with the challenge, the problem that kind of stimulated this, which was the yield versus health mentality. We work with farmers in a number of regions of the world in amplified ingredients. And oftentimes, for the last 100 years, the focus has been massively, the attention has been massively focused on yield and not necessarily health outcome. Now, of course, the farmers want this to be the healthiest food that it can be, but often we see that yield is the goal, and the way that we sell farm goods, commodities, is based on their weight. And I've talked to a farmer the other day, and he was sharing with how they would grow different things. And actually, during high rainy seasons, you would actually get more water, and the nutrients in that food decreased because there was a higher amount of water during that season. So instead of selling on nutrient density, we often sell, and we still sell on yield. And that has an impact on the people that consume it. So in the 1930s and 40s, there was a um, movement that focused on putting things in the soil to boost that yield. But the problem was that it started to decrease the communities of organisms that were in the soil. So we would have high nitrogen, high ingredient inputs, and pesticides, herbicides, things that would actually bind. I know that glyphosate is in the news quite a bit, and glyphosate works by binding copper, zinc, and other minerals from going into the plant so that the weeds are starved from getting those nutrients and growing. And so we saw this season of degradation. And after seeing that degradation over time, we started to notice nutrient density was massively decreasing. So the same amount of nutrients that we would find in our crops was a third, a fourth, an eighth, a tenth of where it used to be. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we started to fortify, and we would put in synthetic nutrients or minerals in a form that are less beneficial so that we could increase what people would take in. So we had to fortify milk with vitamin D. In the human side, we would fortify different grains with B vitamins, or we would add in iron in the form of ferrous sulfate. And fortification was a solution that we thought would work. In the 1950s, a company said, "Well, this isn't really working very well," and so they created individual amino acid chelates, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and they try to find ways to improve that. So, what are we to do about this degradation and now fortification action that we've taken? Well, we've got to move to regeneration. Regeneration has a number of things that are done at the soil level so that everything below the ground can be thriving And that allows everything above the ground to provide exactly what, plants, animals, and humans need to live. And then once we've regenerated, then we start sustaining where we're at. If we sustain where we are now, we will kind of live in this constant cycle of degradation and nutrient fortification. We've got to move to regeneration very quickly, and we'll notice things like better absorption, better bioavailability, utilization of these nutrients in the body, and we'll go into that next. So this nutrient line of demarcation, when we focus on rather than fortification, what we want to focus on is nutrient density. How do you define nutrient density? It's a little bit complicated. If you put minerals or vitamins synthetically into a food, some people say, well, that standardizes the food and that helps hit some numbers on a label, and that's understandable. But really, nutrients were meant to be delivered by the food that carried them. And what we've noticed is that when people consume and when animals consume foods that are carried by, or when nutrients are carried by that food that they were delivered from, they start to notice massive improvements. We did this study in humans for iron deficiency, and we saw people that had been iron deficient for decades, years and decades, and it was male or female, major athletes, women, pregnant women, active adults, and many of them were trying nutrient from single amino acid chelates, so iron from single amino acid chelates. And when they consumed that, they noticed they had black stool, digestive problems, poor tolerability, and they didn't improve. Most people think that iron has a constipating property to it. Actually, iron itself has no constipating properties. What it does is if it's not absorbed, it feeds a pathogenic bacteria in the intestines, and then the byproduct is constipation. So we gave them more whole food iron forms, and when they took that, they saw improvements in 30 days, which they hadn't seen in decades from iron injections and other things. We see the same thing in animals. When they get nutrients attached to the food that carries them, they have better tolerability versus having potentially digestive challenges. Better absorption, which means it's getting into the bloodstream much more effectively. Bioavailability, it's distributing throughout. And then faster health results. That example on iron deficiency, happens in pets as well. You'll see improvements in days and weeks rather than months and years. So we believe that nutrition should be delivered by the food. That means chemically attached the way that nature created it. And you may be wondering, how on earth can we do that? How is it possible? And we want to show you what we've discovered. So if you look at most nutrients that are fortifying, the cheapest ones are what I call rock minerals. In the scientific community, we call those mineral salts. And they're put into food, into pet food, into human food, and they're used as a fortifier to boost things. But, I tell everybody, I said, in reality, we weren't meant to consume rocks, and our pets weren't meant to consume rocks. So then we mix those rocks with food because if you've ever taken a multivitamin as a person or seen multivitamins given to your pet, they often say take with food. Well, why do they tell you to take it with food? Well, because there's no food being consumed in that, unless there are some whole food nutrition brands that are doing some great work. Well, then the next great solution was single amino acid chelates. And truly, in 1957, there was an ingredient company that developed glycinates. And those were much better than these rock minerals, but still, they were missing something. They were missing the complexity of either multi-amino acid chelates, which are attaching the entire protein to the nutrient, or being attached to the food itself that's supposed to carry it to the body. And so while there's continuous improvements, the truth is we need to be getting our nutrition carried by the food that's delivered to our pets. And that's what we want to show you how we can do that today. So if we sustain where we are, we'll have to continue to boost our food's nutrient density by artificial ingredients, synthetic nutrients. We believe that regeneration is not only possible, it's a necessity. Now, how do you regenerate? That's a feels like an overwhelming, complicated idea. And we feel like it takes a really long time, maybe a decade, right? I would ask, maybe you guys comment in the chat, how long would you think it takes to regenerate? And we'll be talking about some of those things in some upcoming slides. But how do we regenerate? We're going to talk about that next. And we believe that organic regeneration, regenerative organic certified, is an efficient path and available today to transform products that you guys are bringing to market. So what is organic? Let's start there. Organic was a movement that was officially codified in the early 2000s. And what they were sharing was basically our food, our agricultural practices have a big do not contain list. We don't use certain herbicides or pesticides, and we grow in a very clean environment. So it was about the removal of toxins in the food supply, in the agricultural supply, that then could be used in products throughout the pet industry, the pet food space, the treat space. So what is regenerative organic? Well, it considers a few additional things. Number one, yes, organic is a great foundation, but we also have to talk about what do we keep inside the soil. And what you keep inside the soil is going to do some dramatic things to the communities in the soil. How do we take care of animal welfare? And then, of course, social fairness. And that drives regenerative. Now, some of you may be asking, what's the impact of regenerative? And I promise we're going to get to that. How valuable is regenerative? I'm going to get to that. But let's talk about the standards. So regenerative organic is a third-party verified process that starts with organic and then focuses on soil health, avoiding tilling, rotational grazing, animal welfare, grass-fed and finished, sustainable shelter for the animals. There's limited transport of those animals. And then obviously for the social fairness side, we want to make sure that the workers are getting fair wages in those communities, and no forced labor, of course, and no child labor. And so those are the foundational items to kick off. Now, how does regenerative organic impact nutrient density? Well, there are five basic principles to regenerative organic. And this is for any crop that's certified regenerative organic, any animal that's raised on regenerative organic pastures. These are the principles that need to happen. I want to talk through them briefly. So maintaining a living root year round. I told you guys I live in Florida. We have hurricanes every so often, and it's very disruptive to our communities. Well, I want you to imagine if you're pulling up the roots. Roots are kind of the anchor. They're the city center of the microbial communities that are in the soil. And so if you pull those out, you've actually disrupted an entire, multi-year community that was established in that soil. And so it kind of has to start rebuilding again. And so maintaining a living root year round supports the foundational communities of the microorganisms in the soil rather than having to start every year from scratch. Minimize soil disturbance. The reason you minimize soil disturbance is every time you move soil from deeper down to higher up above the ground, you disrupt, you disconnect the relationships that are in the soil. And those relationships are important. Maybe some of you are aware, but every time a plant needs a certain nutrient, it sends out a sugar in its root system, requesting it from its community friends of microorganisms. And it says, can I get some selenium? Can I get some copper? Can I get some magnesium? And it sends out a different sugar based on the organism that can grab that nutrient for it. But if it sends out that signal and says, hey, can I get some of this? And there's no organism or community there to support it, it might miss out in that moment on a nutrient that it needs to grow. So we want to minimize soil disturbance. Keeping the soil covered, that's the third principle. Why do we keep the soil covered? you guys might know that UV light is actually used to sterilize a lot of things. And while I think it's a fantastic tool for sterilizing medical equipment for surgeries and activities that are going to, be invasive to us in our lives, you don't want sterile soil. Sterile soil is detrimental to plant, animal, and human health. And so keeping the soil covered minimizes the amount of UV light that disinfects our soil. We want to keep it highly dense, highly active with life and community. Maximizing crop diversity allows us not to pull too much of one nutrient and even share nutrients across crops. And then, of course, integrating livestock. If you can imagine, animals are great at eating and going to the bathroom, so they are the accelerators to the regenerative agricultural system. These are all great principles. These all sound really good, but you might be wondering, what is the actual benefit? And at the beginning, you heard Allison kind of define nutrients in a few ways. You have your macronutrients, your proteins, your carbs, your fats. You have micronutrients, your vitamins, your minerals. But then you have phytonutrients, and I'm going to give you an example from that, and then maybe share some things that are newly coming out. We work with a farm that has been growing for years in the herb space, and they have been growing organically. But you could see these types of yields consistently anywhere you go. They've been growing organically and conventionally similar yields. I'm going to use the example of turmeric, and the turmeric bulk yield on an organic or conventional farm is typically 6,000 kilos per acre. So that's average anywhere you grow it. In one growing season, so that means from one year to the next year, when they implemented these regenerative practices, it went from 6,000 kilos per acre to 33,000 kilos per acre. Typically, people say wow in that moment, and then I tell them there's a second wow. Most of the time, you'll see between 1 and 3% nutrient density of the nutrient that most of us know turmeric for, whether you're using it in pet nutrition for joint health or inflammation. Usually, the turmeric roots have 1 to 3% of that phytonutrient called curcuminoids. So it's a group of phytonutrients. Well, when they switched to regenerative practices, where they kept the living root, covered the soil, didn't disrupt it, had integrated animals, and even maximized crop diversity. I think they grew like 6 or 7 different herbs in that area. They saw an almost a 4x to 8x increase, depending on if it's 1 to 3% in nutrient density. So you're seeing almost a 6x increase in bulk yield and an improvement of 4 to 5 to 6x increase in nutrient density. And we're not talking about in 10 years, we're talking about in one growing season from growing organically to regeneratively. Most people ask, how do you feed the world growing regenerative organically? And I said, I don't know how to feed the world any other way. And so what regenerative practices consider is the water cycle, community dynamics. We get to see the communities above the ground, but there's also communities below the ground that improve the mineral cycle so that minerals move from plants to animals to be restored back into the soil and then obviously consumed by our pets and us. And energy flows consistently throughout rather than us extracting all of the energy from the soil. Um, how do you implement these regenerative practices, though, into products? And we've been asked that question for some time. Amplified Ingredients um, was spun off from a regenerative organic farm in Missouri, about 4,000 acres. And we work with regenerative farms all over the world. And we brought to market about a year and a half ago regenerative organic glandulars. We have liver, heart, and kidney that are certified regenerative organic, and that means they're grass-fed and finished. And we saw these products, and we said, What are what's the nutrient content in these products. And we noticed that in some nutrients they were 2x higher. In some nutrients they were 3x higher. Now we're seeing data, not on our product, but on beef, that even proteins are 20% more in regenerative agricultural practices and farms. So we brought these to market for pet brands and human brands to utilize in their finished products, and the results are phenomenal. So I wanted to introduce to you guys the idea of not just regenerative practices, which many of you have probably heard, but the fact that there are solutions out there and solutions that you can use in your next formulation, your next reformulation, that will transform the supply chains and the products that you're offering to the marketplace. You know, the future of our pets' health really lies in what we put in their bowl. And for us as ingredient suppliers or brand builders or manufacturers, we have to tie that uh, indivisible line between soil health to what consumers buy for their pets. You know, we can never replace everything in the bowl that they're eating with a regenerative product today, but we can start today and we can start to support farmers, support supply chains and distribution chains so that we get ever improving nutrient gap closure that actually transforms the health of our pets and even our homes. So thank you. This has been exciting to put together, and I hope it was encouraging to you all to see that there is a possible way to regenerate and transform our planet.
Yay! I'm just giving you an applause. I see a lot of reactions coming from our audience. Siko, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um, Before we get into our audience Q&A, I just have a few reflections of what I've just learned from you. I think first of all, I internalized the meaning of the word indivisible, which was in our webinar title, but like truly I love how you framed this as like our supply chain cannot be divided. It is indivisible between the health of soil, animals, and plants. That was just a really important grounding. I also like my jaw dropped when you shared that it like an eighth, a tenth of the nutrients in food have been lost because of the agricultural practices that we have. That's scary. And also, I am somewhat familiar already with the principles of regenerative agriculture, the living root system, the soil disturbance minimization, etc. But I learned for the first time today, like kind of some of the whys behind that. Like, why does this matter? You shared that plants ask the soil microorganisms for nutrients, like they communicate in the soil, which is amazing. Plants are so smart. You shared the UV light tidbit. Anyways, I just really appreciated those details. I
Awesome.
also, sorry, I learned a lot. One more thing.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm really excited to hear that you're in like the beef byproduct space. PSC has been involved with an initiative called Growing Grass, which is all about that and like how
Mm,
do we keep these regenerative meat products like at their highest value throughout the supply chain. So more to be said there.
yes.
So we do have some audience questions, but before we really get into that, I wanted to launch another poll. So either feel free to be typing your question, or we wanted to ask, are you actively looking for ingredients that allow you to make regenerative claims on your product label? So let us know if yes, you are actively looking to source regenerative ingredients, or you're exploring options. Maybe you're interested, but cost or supply is a barrier, or it's not a priority. So we'll leave that up on screen for a little bit. It seems like we got a lot of yeses, which is very exciting.
That is great.
Okay, take another few seconds to answer our poll. Okay, I think let's go ahead and end it. It looks like yes, the yeses won. So seems like a lot of people are interested, which is so great because you did a great job explaining why it's so important.
Awesome.
So let me hop over to the questions that we got. Thank you to those of you who put one in. The first one is very relevant to the pet industry. It says, "We have known dogs that eat rocks and have been told by vets that this means that they are lacking certain nutrients." Siko, do you know anything about that? Is
Yeah,
that
I think
true?
that that's true for grass in the open field, and yes, they. I'm not saying that animals can't eat rocks, but I don't believe that's the best delivery form for their nutrients. So even though we do have salt licks, if you go to a farm, they'll have things like salt licks for improving animal electrolyte content. And I would agree that those are have been helpful, but I think they're a demonstration that the animal isn't getting the nutrients from the places that it would historically, because salt licks are a human idea. They're wonderful for managing as a band-aid, but animals should be getting their nutrients from the food they eat, and not scouring for places that aren't normally where they consume. So, not denying that there is a bridge for the gap in those nutrient fortifications, and what we see in the animal we do as humans, we put those rocks in our food. But I think there are better forms, and I think the data shows better bioavailability, better absorption, and better utilization. So bridging that gap more and more by giving them what they need in their food is the goal.
Great. There's another question here about the certification process.
Sure.
It says our company 100% supports ROC, but we find this process is very expensive for many farms and producers, thereby making the certification just unaffordable. Can you talk about that balance of like when to get certified and maybe when it doesn't make sense?
Yeah, and I would say that I don't know if the farms what size they are, but they should be they need to be producing pretty significantly. So we thankfully get to work with farms. We work with the largest certified regenerative agriculture farm in the world, 6.2 million acres. And what they're doing is they're actually helping other farms come into their network and leverage their certification. So I would say it needs to be supplying outside of a small market. It needs to be supplying to the broader supply chain in order for it to make financial sense. Not every small farm, I have small farms here in Florida that we enjoy, from mushroom farmers to cattle ranchers. Friends of mine that have done cattle ranching, it doesn't make sense for them to even do certified organic, even the cost is too much. So it should be at a scale that allows them to supply a bit of a bigger market than maybe they're serving right now. I don't know if that answers the question completely, but that's been our experience, is that it's ideal for those that are serving a bigger North American market or international market than just one market.
Sure. I guess a little follow-up on that, because I think this is something that I've heard a lot in our work at PSC, is that like there are certainly advantages to having a third-party certification because it comes
Sure.
along with credibility, you get a logo, but it's just not feasible. So I guess like if there's a smaller farm that is doing all of the right practices, is there a way that they can still be part of this movement without getting that official th third-party certification?
Listen, I think that the certification I will talk about separately on the value for really the massive agricultural side, and that's where the risk is. For the small farmers that are producing in their either local area, regional area, even statewide, I think they allow people to come and see what they're doing. They can talk about, they can take a video of their place and say, this is how we minimize disturbance of the soil. This is how we operate. I think there is plenty of room for self-certification. My caution is with larger farms. So if you go to um, a major crop science company that we would all know, I won't mention them on here, but they have a goal of doing regenerative organic practice. I'm sorry, regenerative practices, not organic. And there are some people, I know this in the human space, I don't know if this happens in the pet space quite as much, but that say I can spray all sorts of things on my crop and still be regenerative. And so that's where, I would challenge the idea that if you're disrupting the soil, if you're minimizing or hurting microbial life, if you're limiting the plant's ability to pull in nutrients, then that's not the same as the intent of the movement. So I think as long as the intention is appropriate, then there's ability to share what you're doing and organic being the minimum, which is what you're avoiding, and then obviously what you're building on top of that.
Yeah. Okay. That honestly makes me feel relieved that it's like, okay, there's like something for everybody to do this and like steps along the way as farms scale up.
Yeah, the transition, this is a transition. This is not a trend. I want to be very clear for you that are brand builders. This is not a trend. This is a transition, and it's a transition for, the future of our planet, which includes us and our pets. And so facilitating the transition intentionally gives us a really great opportunity to give and multiply. As you saw, the multiplication opportunities are immense.
Okay. I actually have a question. How do you actually measure the nutrients in food? Like what does it actually look like to take ingredients and like know how many nutrients are in a finished pet food product and know like how much you do or don't need to fortify it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to reference somebody that I highly respect. It's an organization called the Audacious Institute. They're constantly doing testing, and they're actually testing is this magical thing. If you all have worked with testing labs, sometimes you're able to clearly nail the test results, the analyte, all that stuff. So they're navigating this complicated world of macronutrients, micronutrients, and phytonutrients because in the United States we have a narrow definition of what is able to be said about how much protein is in your beef and how much your eggs have. And so even if a farmer could have a bigger yield, the USDA or the FDA doesn't permit you to say different things in the human space. And I think there's limitations, in the pet space. They're borrowing data from places that consolidate conventional test results. But you would do proteins, carbohydrates, fats. Those types of testings are pretty consistent. So that you can find a lab that is known for doing food, they can provide that for you. Once you get into micronutrients, those are pretty simple as well. Minerals are the simplest, and then you want to identify the right testing method for your food that will test your vitamins and minerals. And then you have your we'll call them phytonutrients or other nutrients. So like beef has omega-3s, omega-6s. You want to make sure that the method they're using effectively is able to test it in the product that you're using. Usually it's best at the raw material level to confirm that. It gets more complicated as you get to the finished good. Not impossible with minerals, but with maybe some other analytes.
Okay. We have a follow-up question from an attendee on that. Are there any physical indicators that a crop is more nutrient dense, or can you really only do that through testing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes you can see some good physical indicators, but usually you have to know the standard. So, for example, turmeric curcuminoids are very orange. So, as you see those brighter colors, maybe you guys have cracked an egg and you've noticed a brighter orange yolk. That usually means it has higher zeaxanthin and lutein and some other compounds that it got from marigolds. And so those are some ways that you can tell visually a little bit, but as far as the actual quantity, you're gonna have to send it to a testing lab.
Okay. Gosh, almost everything you just said, you could replace nutrient measurement with carbon measurement because I know that that's a big like unanswered question in the regenerative agriculture space too is like how much of the like carbon are we sequestering in the soil by these practices? Like how is this also a solution to our climate change problems? And I just know that like sometimes I wake up and I'm just like I need to know how much soil carbon there is. And it's like, yeah, you do it through testing. So,
The minimizing the disruption of soil is dramatic. in the impact that it has on the carbon cycle. And obviously the plants are, built on the amount of carbon that, the way you measure a tree's diameter tells you how much carbon that tree is holding. And so that all comes from a combination of the soil plus, plus the nutrients in the air like carbon dioxide, et cetera. So.
Okay, cool. Okay, I have another one here. It's about kind of the communication side of this. Have you seen any examples of brands successfully explaining soil health to pet parents in simple, compelling language?
You know, uh, you mentioned that I was with a brand and I love ingredients. It's because I struggle with that same messaging. But what I would say is that um, if you can message that the soil builds the nutrients that are in your product and what you're delivering has naturally occurring high levels of that nutrient, that's not as concise as you want, but that's the idea is that your food is carrying the nutrients that your animal needs at the highest amount. Maybe you still have to fortify a little bit because you can't use 100% regenerative yet. But if you compared uh, inclusions of fortification nutrients and said, we used to have to fortify with 10 milligrams of a, synthetic vitamin. And now we can decrease that significantly. Those are stories that you can begin to tell, probably off label since it's going to be a long form story. But it's really going to be an overall movement that's probably going to tell a complicated story. And the reason that the story is complicated is because we used to just eat food. And it used to come from soil that was healthy. And now because we've transitioned, we have to recognize and go back to some things that were just basic, like the nutrients should be in the food at the highest levels for our bodies to utilize. So,
Yeah. Okay. Um, we have one last audience question here. And it's about like meeting the minimum AFCO requirements
mm,
for nutrients in pet food. There was like certain requirements, like it has to have a certain composition of zinc, copper,
sure.
iron, etc. Do you have any data or any stories on how an animal diet with regenerative agriculture ingredients versus these like fortified supplement diets like meet those requirements?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have direct data, but I will say that as recently as last week, and I almost included the data in the presentation, the Eudacious Institute actually worked with some regenerative farms here in North America that demonstrated 200% increases in certain B vitamins compared to the conventional material, significant increases in certain minerals compared to the conventional beef material. And so the short answer is I don't have an example immediately. The more complete answer is I believe there are solutions coming and they're already here. Whether they're available to the entire pet community yet, that's something that we need to work out. But not to do it too shameless of a plug, our organs, especially our liver, has some pretty high content of certain nutrients that would support that in a better way. Again, we're probably not going to get rid of fortification in the next 12, 18, 24 months. But if we start thinking about timelines that soil organisms multiply rapidly if they're cared for, right? Communities, in the soil thrive if they're cared for the right way. And when they're cared for, what they deliver to our plants, what they deliver to our pets, and what they deliver to us as people, is really transformational. And so I think just starting the process is a big deal.
Okay. Well, wow, that was a great note to end on. Is there anything else that you would like to leave our audience with today?
I know this is a complicated subject, and what I would just encourage everyone to ask is what new product am I thinking about, or what old product might need to be adjusted to just start messaging we're using regenerative organic ingredients and we want to do more, but we're starting. Just start. They say that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. and the second best time is right now. And so plant the tree of regenerative organic in your product lines, and then we'll start to see a transformation that we never imagined.
Amazing message. Just start. Start somewhere. Thank you so much, Siko. This has been amazing. I know our audience loved it too from looking at all of the chats coming through. Thank you all for attending as well and listening. And let's all start somewhere. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Bye.